One of the children actually called me Nana, and that made me feel, I felt comfortable. When he called me Nana, I thought, oh, he's not seeing me as a person above, he saw me as an equal, as his Nana. So it was nice.
I found Generation Wiser a very interesting experience. The children have been wonderful. I don't have grandchildren, and these are like my pseudo-grandchildren. I've enjoyed working with the kids, and they've been so well behaved, listened to what we say, and we've just done lots of things. And I'm hoping that the children have enjoyed it as well, because we've enjoyed doing it with them.
My name's Jackson and I'm 6 years old. I'm Mila Palmer and I'm 6. My name is Christopher and I'm 6 years old. I've been making animals and making some silly hats. They teach me how to tie really hard knots. I just like getting my hands messy. Learn how I'm getting up my hands and around and around and around and around and around and around. And it was very fun. My favourite part is making the owls.
I've enjoyed every Tuesday that I've come in. It's like my second family. Yeah, it's very, very entertaining.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys. What are you talking about?
All young men with suits and ties, just sitting in the crowd smoking big cigars. I hope you're ready for what's coming now. I'm the one, I'm the lady that will bring you down. There's a joint on the corner where the big boys play, where the whiskey's running like the river, but they all never come for the booze and bass. I'm the one, I'm the lady that'll rock this place. That'll rock this place. That'll rock this place. Rock this place. Rock this place. Rock this
At the Aberfeldy Men's Shed this morning, where U3A have been partnering with Moonee Valley to create a new program called Wednesday Woodies. So let's go and find out what it's all about.
Yeah, I like to do some handcrafting.
My background is this way. I was born among sawdust, we can say. Something that being cabinet maker, joiner, is in the family.
I use this tray all the time at home.
Well, I'm trying to learn a bit of woodwork and use the equipment.
And I joined this, call it men's shed, in this case is U3A, the University of the Third Age, that glue us together. Glue, you see? Glue us together here in the probably more or less the same interest to say sociable with other people.
People like Nino able to teach us.
Don't put me so high just in case I commit mistake. Then how can I come back?
Even if we do the... Yes, we have come to learn skills as well, because a lot of the men here know how to do use all these tools and know how to put things together and fix things, and most women don't get the opportunity to do that when they're at home. They're busy doing other things.
Measure twice, cut once.
It's nice, it's very nice. I like it.
Welcome everybody to the ordinary meeting of Council for the 14th of May 2019, which is now officially open. A warm welcome to members of the public gallery who have joined us here tonight at the Civic Centre, as well as those watching from home via live stream. Thank you for joining us. As well as being live streamed, the recording of this meeting will also be available on our website, so attendees in the gallery are advised that their presence may be recorded, and I'd like to ask that mobile phones please be switched to silent mode during the meeting. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, spirits, community members past and present. I would also like to extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Councillors, there are no apologies for tonight's meeting, so I'll move to the confirmation of minutes. And can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday 23rd of April 2019 be confirmed? Councillor Soares. Councillor Lawrence, second. Are there any questions regarding the minutes? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda this evening?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a conflict of interest in item 11.1. It's an indirect conflict of interest for conflicting duty for reasons disclosed to the CEO prior to the commencement of tonight's meeting. Thank you. Councillors, do we have any presentations tonight? Don't know that we do, no. Councillors, we have received one joint letter to be tabled tonight, so can I please have a councillor present the joint letter and move the motion?
Mayor, I have got here a joint letter which has 20 signatures, and it's requesting a number of changes to the unsafe section of road on Maribyrnong Road between the Maribyrnong River and the corner of Epsom Road, and requesting specifically that one, we reduce the speed limit from 60 kilometres per hour to 40 or 50 kilometres per hour. 2, change the traffic light settings at the corner of Maribyrnong Road and Epsom Road, turning right inbound towards the city so that the right turning arrow for vehicles is red when pedestrian light is green. And make the same change at the corner of Maribyrnong Road and Orford Street inbound when motorists are turning left. 3, improve the pedestrian signage at all 3 intersections, including the pedestrian crossing at Maribyrnong River, the corners of Orford Street and the corners of Epsom Road. I think actually that should say Maribyrnong Road. And 4, improve the signage and marking at the 4 tram stops and 2 bus stops in this area. And would you like me to put forward the motion? I'd like to move 1, that Council resolves to 1, receive and note the joint letter, 2, refer this matter to the Director of Planning and Development for investigation and reporting back to Council, and 3, advise the organiser accordingly.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Cusack, thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. We have not received any questions from the community for tonight's meeting, so I shall move on to reports from special committees. There are none tonight. So the first report on tonight's agenda is a planning application at 14 Walker Street, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Marshall?
Yes, Mayor, I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack, thank you. Are there any questions regarding this report? No. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a planning application which is proposing the construction of 6 dwellings at Walker Street in Moonee Ponds. And there will be a combination of 2, 3 and 4 bedrooms and 4 triple-storey and 2 4-storey dwellings. It's on a site of 616 square metres, and I suppose the most important factor about this, which is both good and bad, good for the applicant, but other questions about whether this is the right zoning, is in the activity centre zone. So, and that ultimately is what has driven this particular planning application. This is something that we moved at the last meeting that it be deferred because I had a number of questions in relation to the impact of the development on the property to the south, and a number of queries both about amenity impacts and also about what it might do to the ability of that property to develop its land if it so chooses to do so, again being in an activity centre zone. And so the officers have answered those questions, and I appreciate those responses and clarifications. A couple of important things to note about this. Firstly, that it does comply with the mandatory height requirements, and the mandatory height in this particular precinct is 14 metres, and the application comes in at 12.7 metres. It also complies with the required number of car parks under the applicable planning rules, and it has 47% site coverage and permeability of over 22%. Which again, when you're looking at a site within an activity centre zone, are probably better than many of the other applications we have seen. There have been some improvements proposed, what I view as improvements via the conditions proposed by the officers, and there are some screening requirements, there are tree protection requirements, and there are also some changes to finishes and materials being used, which I think will be beneficial. But as I said, my particular concerns were in relation to the impact of the property to the south, and I've really reflected on this because we know very well that VCAT hold that when you are in an activity centre zone, the level of amenity that you can expect is significantly reduced to that in the general residential zone, and we've firsthand a number of times experienced adverse VCAT outcomes where our attempts to, I suppose, protect amenity in circumstances much worse than this one have not been successful. And it's something that I've said before, but I'll say it again for the councillors who hear, if they are involved in processes where they are drawing boundaries, and for councillors who might be future councillors, that decision to draw a boundary of an activity centre zone or to draw a boundary for a DDO or whatever it might be, that once you do that, then you are earmarking that property for at the least medium density development, but more likely high density development. And every time those lines go on the map, you need to be thinking about the properties that are there and thinking about, if you earmark that as an area for development, that is invariably what you will get. And that's what we've got here. So again, being mindful of the level of compliance with the planning scheme and the rules that apply to this particular site, I think on balance it is an application that should be supported.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I think Councillor Marshall has basically covered all of the issues. It's one where the usual discussion about the reasons why you might object to a building like this are shelved because of it being in the activity centre. Unfortunately, I do have to agree with Councillor Marshall about the fact that we don't have a great deal of opportunity to protect the places in and Walker Street and that area. I don't know that any of it is even rating a listing in terms of the heritage world and so on like that either. And it's a shame that this has occurred, especially in the light of the way the racecourse is developing and the fact that they're well down the track of creating a walking-based environment and to encourage people to look at an entrance into the track that is about lower level and all the rest of it. And now we've got this prospect of being picked off one at a time by developers in the space around Walker and Coates Streets, which runs contrary to all the discussion that's happened in so much of the stuff around the racecourse development.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Does any other councillor wish to speak on this item? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I will concur with my fellow ward councillors. The reality is this site is in the activity centre zone, which, while visually, when you're standing out there on Pascoe Vale Road, and it looks like a fairly clear delineation between what is the built-up area and the not the built-up area. That activity centre zone does extend and include Walker Street, and therefore we're assessing this application based on those rules and controls of an activity centre zone. As Councillor Marshall alluded to, the height is compliant, the car parking provisions are compliant, the site coverage is well and truly compliant, and therefore there's nothing really within our control to refuse an application like this when it comes to us and adheres to the rules set out for that ACZ. I think it does also raise the point that Councillor Marshall mentioned, that this is a very clear example of where picking that boundary of an ACZ, whether it's just one street, too many, can have some severe impacts for those that own and reside in residential properties, and is something that should definitely be at the forefront of our minds should that situation occur in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. The next report on tonight's agenda is a planning application at 21 Argyle Street, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Motion for Argyle Street, Moonee Ponds. Councillor Sypek. Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Are there any questions regarding this report? Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
I think the report speaks for itself, and I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation and support it.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have any notes prepared on this one. However, I did take quite a long time looking at it, because it is a street that I wouldn't have necessarily imagined that there'd be this sort of level of density, but it is quite a big block, and it is on the particular site I think can take it. It's 4 double-storey dwellings with the required amount of car parking, site coverage at 55% and permeability at 45%. It does meet the garden area requirements, and when stacked up against Res Code, the only thing that I found it a bit grey, if I just get to it, was neighbourhood character. I could potentially understand, but honestly I think that there's been a long planning history for this one, and it's one of those ones that could have been 3 dwellings a while ago. It's now 4, and they could potentially try to squeeze more on in the future, and I think that the way the block's situated, it possibly works. I'm still happy to listen to Murnong Ward councillors, because I'm sure that they will come up with their own thoughts, but that's from reading the report how I'm reading it and stacking it up against Res Code.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Nation.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I'm not overly comfortable with this application. When looking at it on paper, 4 double-storey dwellings, 4 double-storey 3-bedroom dwellings on 800 square metres, which is not a huge parcel when you're squeezing in that much built form. This area, particularly the properties that back onto Margaret Muir Way, this area has been slammed with development, with properties facing onto what was a somewhat disused laneway, and frontages popping up all along Margaret Muir Way, putting a stress on the roads in the area, the laneways in the area, parkings in the area. And I'm just hesitant that, yes, there's been developments that have been approved, particularly those at the rear of properties in this area, but I don't think that is grounds to just rubber stamp another one. And when you look at the res code analysis, which I spoke about in the previous item, that when there's rules in place, we want the applicants to adhere to those rules. There is quite a distinct level of non-compliance with a couple of main clauses: the neighbourhood character and street setback. But then when you run through the rest of the clauses, B12 safety objectives needs to be conditioned by council to make it compliant. So does B13 landscaping objectives, B22 overlooking objectives, B24 noise impacts, B29 solar access to open space, and B31 design detail objectives. So council officers have had to condition this application quite considerably to make it compliant. So therefore, when you're looking at the original application, and it's quite a large number of areas of non-compliance, it just doesn't sit well with me. As I said, the 4 double-storey, 3 bedrooms on 800 square metres doesn't sit well with me, and nor does the res code non-compliance. And therefore, like item 10.1, where I felt compelled to approve it because of this res code assessment, I will vote against the motion on the floor because I'm not comfortable with its adherence to res code.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor like to speak to this motion? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks, Mayor, and I'm also speaking against the motion. The planning history is obviously complex, and I certainly acknowledge that applicants and landowners have the right to put in as many permit applications as they want, but it can be frustrating. You sort of get to that point where you think, you know what, if you'd actually gone ahead and developed that one, that maybe you could have resolved it, but the problem is that you sink more costs, and then the more costs you sink, the more you've got to try and fit on the site to make a development profitable, and we see it quite frequently. So I'll just do that as I suppose, an overarching comment about some of the things that we see coming through council. But for me, I'm trying not to fall into the mistake that I always try and speak against, which is just focusing on the number of dwellings, because I've focused on thinking about, all right, well, what is it about the way this is designed and what the number of dwellings does from a design perspective and from a compliance with res code perspective, and that's where the difficulty arises from me. So there are quite narrow breaks between the properties, and I'm very significantly concerned, particularly from Melrose Street and from the adjacent property, it will be on the northern side, that it is going to present as just a bulk of building, and I think from a design perspective too, that's a concern. The way the garages are sited, again, there are a number of streets around Moonee Ponds where you have these garages, and I know officers have said they're sitting behind fences, but from what we can see presented on the visuals here, I still think that from a design perspective it will detract from the street, or the streets, I should say. So my concerns are primarily, in addition to the ones set out by Councillor Nation about those non-compliances with res code, or the fact that it's had to, for what is a relatively simple development proposal, had to have a significant number of conditions to ensure compliance. But that neighbourhood character issue is one that I always believe we should fight to the death, and it's one that more often than not we see that the applications, the officer's assessment is that they do comply. This doesn't, and that's actually acknowledged, but also the visual bulk for me and the scale of this development I don't think is appropriate, the way it's been designed, and it's been designed this way because they're trying to fit on too many dwellings.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Cusack?
Mayor, if this motion is lost, I think we should be looking at an alternative, and so I'd like to foreshadow an option there, rather than it be just left hanging. I concur with my councillors from our ward, there are too many issues with this development that are conditioned to make it sound like there was a sensible and hard-edged approach to creating something that was the best that could be possibly done in that area. This will be planning permit number 6 in 10 years on this same block. And for those that aren't aware, it's been, the planning permits over that short period of time have been for a 3 dwellings, a 4 double-storey dwellings, a double-storey dwelling at the rear of an existing house, a 2-lot subdivision, a construction of 3 double-storey dwellings, and then finally a 3-lot subdivision, which is the current and sitting there. Unfortunately, that can't go ahead as it was agreed to, and was agreed to very strongly on the basis that the original house, which faced onto Argyle Street, was to be maintained, and therefore all those questions around neighbourhood amenity and so on like that, and the character of the area, and the questions around garden and all that sort of stuff were knocked out of the game. However, it was demolished and the block cleared with a view to getting this particular permit up. And I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Nation. 8 conditions, 8 areas of assessment have to be conditioned in order to be able to get this through. Whereas if you're starting with a clean slate and you actually understand Res Code and you understand what the objectives of this council have been in terms of the advice that it provides to planners, and also within the State Planning Act, it's extraordinary that we have to actually think in that space. I think that also there is a question, even goes back to the very first piece of work that was done in this meeting tonight, which was about the traffic management in and around Orford and Street and Scotia Street and so on like that. And Argyle sits right in the middle of that. And so there is always a pressure in that area around traffic. We have turned Margaret Muir Way, as Councillor, and as the report says and all the rest of it, into a lane with all these backyards, garages. Yet there are 1 or 2 places that are facing onto Margaret Muir that are struggling to survive as nice little places. The other and the final thing, and that I suppose that happens around here, is that there is always going to be stresses around traffic, car parking, and doubly so when we start to look at all of these developments and the fact that they won't be able to get any doings. And I suppose the final thing is the northerly perspective, which worries me no end.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Lawrence?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I thank all councillors for their comments. My only take on this would be that it is a 3-street frontaged development, and that to me indicates that it's not just everything coming and going out of the one street. It does have that opportunity to do something a little bit more special and a little bit more innovative. And looking at the plan, I understand there are a lot of conditions, but that's the role of our planning department. When they see something that's not adequate, they're meant to add conditions, and they've done that quite considerably, I might add, in the report, and I'm sure the other councillors have all read that. So that's healthy in what I can see. The noise and the other levels of traffic movement, etc., have all been taken into consideration. The setback for the garages, I think, is a healthy move. It doesn't leave them sitting right up against the street frontage, and that's again something that doesn't have to be done, but they've taken that within the situation of their design, and I think that's again a good outcome. the site coverage, which was mentioned by Councillor Byrne, at only 55%. You can't argue with that. That's a good result for everybody. We get something that's achievable. So overall, I think the development meets the Res Code, and I think this is something that I would support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor like to speak to this motion? Councillor Gatcham-Ritchie.
Only very briefly, thank you to all of the other councillors for popping in your feedback on this. I'm mindful there was a piece of noise and traffic about the planning history that I've tried not to consider too much. I've tried to consider just what's in front of us. And then I look at what would happen if this went to VCAT and what the likely outcome at VCAT would be if we spent money fighting something at VCAT that is highly compliant with the conditioning. So in this circumstance, I will be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Would you like to close, Councillor Sypek?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I've heard the arguments for and against, and I believe all arguments are very, very valid. I've been on council for 15 years, and I can't recall the last time that we've had a planning application that's had no conditions put on it. I've even seen dual occupancies with conditions on it. So the conditioning is actually a tool that our planning department can use to make most planning applications compliant. So, you know, conditions, I think, are a very good process that we have in doing planning applications. So when I looked at this, it complies in a lot of ways. I agree with Councillor Gatcham-Ritchie. If this went to VCAT, it's pretty much a pretty good option that they've put in this time around. And, you know, sometimes we have to make the hard decisions, Madam Mayor, and that's the reason why I'll be supporting this application.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's Councillor Soares, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Gatcham-Ritchie and Councillor Lawrence. All those against? Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall and Councillor Cusack. That is carried. The next report is 10.3 and is titled Exclusion of 2 Curtis Street, Essendon for amendments C200 MWN and C201 MWN. Can I please have a motion, councillors? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sypek, thank you. Are there any questions regarding this report? No. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I won't go too deeply into the history of this this motion, this report, I should say. Apart from saying that there was a consent to demolish the building on 2 Curtis Street in February 2017, and it was deemed to not meet the threshold of interim heritage controls at that time. This expired February 9th, 2018, and then a building permit was issued on March 13th, 2019 by Philip Watt of BSP Melbourne, not this council. On April 1st, 2019, Moonee Valley Council received another request for demolition of the building at 2 Curtis Street. Council had completed a heritage study in 2017, which was adopted in March 19, I think it's 19, I can't read my own writing, 2019, which included the property at 2 Curtis Street, Essendon. And that was under the amendment C200, and I'll use the term moon because it's easier than saying MOON. Council has since written to the Minister for Planning requesting amendment C201 moon under section 20 part 4 of the Planning Environment Act 1987 to apply the interim heritage overlay to various heritage places in Moonee Valley. Anyway, the upshot of all of this is that we've made a request, council that is, to delete 2 Curtis Street from the proposed amendment C200 and C201 204 Moon. The bottom line is there's no impact to the proposed heritage amendments other than this, and it's probably a neat and tidy outcome that was a little bit messy, but the ultimate aim is to ensure that a property that for whatever reason got caught into the crossfire is not included. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to this motion? Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those in favour is Councillor Soros, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gatchmurchie, Councillor Lawrence. All those against? Councillor Byrne. That is carried. The next item on the agenda is the update on Vic Road's Children's Crossing Supervisor Subsidy Program. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Nation. Are there any questions regarding this report, councillors? No. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. So essentially there was a decision to cease funding, and after reconsideration and an on-site visit and being mindful of other circumstances, most particularly a funding commitment from the state government to introduce drop-off and pick-up zones around the school, there's been a view that this should be considered as part of all of that work, and I think that's sensible. There's nothing worse than doing piecemeal bits and pieces when you're looking at traffic management, because obviously what you do in relation to one thing can have flow-on impacts from another. It's a really quirky, strange little site, this one, and the traffic volumes are very low, so we need to acknowledge that, and I certainly do. But the difficulty is, and I stood out there watching the kids walk through there, it's an interesting conflict point. You've got a brick fence which comes right up to the boundary. You've got kids who walk around that. You've got kids who sort of run across that. You've got parents who are driving up the right of way, sometimes double parking, sometimes not necessarily paying as much attention as they should. And unfortunately, that's a relatively common story around some of our school zones. And I'm sure all of us have seen behaviour that you just think, hang about, you're a parent at this school, like, please drive safely. So for me, I can certainly understand why the school is concerned about its removal. And as I said, ultimately this is about looking at the site and the whole school holistically rather than just making piecemeal decisions, which I think is always a sensible way to approach things.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I am more than happy to second this motion. I think particularly when it comes to A, encouraging kids to walk to school, but also B, the safety of our local young residents, that little bit of extra money to maintain a crossing supervisor at this site is money well spent. As Councillor Marshall mentioned, the crossing supervisor was due to go at the end of term 2, so this analysis of whether or not council thinks it's a suitable location or it's warranted based on foot traffic definitely needs to be assessed once those new traffic measures are brought in, noting that there's quite a few changes going on around Flemington Primary School, even down Kent Street as well on the other side of Mount Road. So I think this is a very wise decision. Keep the crossing supervisor there until things change or habits change with the drop-off and pick-up zone, and then we can reassess. But as I said, I think for the pittance that's spent on funding school crossing supervisors and the importance that walking to school plays in having a healthy and an active young community, that I have no issues funding these sort of roles.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak on this motion? Councillor Cusack.
I'll support this motion reluctantly. I was part of the original meeting in council and that agreed that we would look at not funding the crossing supervisor at this point. I know it extremely well. It's only very close to my house, so we've been walking up and down through this area for over 30 years. I don't know that it's necessarily a pittance that we're spending on crossing supervisors. It's something in the order of 900 grand, and while the state government is offering money to improve pick-up and drop-off points, I also note that one of the little areas that is suggested or has been turned into a drop-off point, which is in Lucknow Street near the corner of Lucknow and Mangalore, which is literally around the corner, the residents are most unhappy because they've lost car parks for that couple of hours and have to shift cars in an area that's tight in car parking. So there's a never going to win situation here. The only obvious place is to work through maybe what might be able to be done in Flemington Street and what might, and that's on the other side of the school. And on the basis of that, and pinching a line from Councillor Marshall, looking at this in a holistic way is the only sensible way to do it. People come down Padman Lane, which is very, very narrow, and we're talking about a school crossing here that's 3 and a bit metres wide, because that lane is very, very narrow, and they come down there as a convenience thing to, through the lights at Kent Street, zoom down, drop off Junior, and then go back out onto Cashmere and kind of do this circle. And the reality is that they need to be able to, they need to think in another way. That is just not a very good place to have any cars. It should be walking only, and I support that change.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next report is 10.5 and it is the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre Special Rate and Charge Declaration. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, I'll move the officer's recommendation as a motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Nation. Are there any questions regarding this report? Councillors? No. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, sorry, before the back room comes running out saying you've got no microphone. Just briefly, and to note a couple of things. One is that this has been an activity that has been operated for quite some years now and is the same or rolled out into other shopping strips. Council obviously works closely with the Trades Association in terms of how the money is spent, what the business plan is to do that and all the rest of it. Right now, Moonee Ponds is at a critical stage. Council's thinking about how it can improve and work in that whole Moonee Ponds Activity Centre through improvements to the streetscapes and the likes of that. And getting this up and working properly is a critical part of getting that balance and reinvigorating parts of Moonee Ponds Central, which have been not central as in the organisation, but central as in the geography. Moonee Ponds as a place to come back to. A lot of disruption and dislocation has occurred with building. We'll hopefully get over that hump in the not too distant future and make something of this. It also hopefully reinvigorates and energises some of the work that has been done over the last couple of years, in particular the Winter Fest, etc., but also things like the progressive dinners and so on like that, that the traders have put in place. So we need to keep this one working.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. The Moonee Ponds special rate and charge is one of the rates and charges put on local trading strips that I feel really gives a dividend to the businesses in the area. That can be seen through events such as Winterfest, that was co-funded with Council, but a number of activities related to particular seasons or festivals or events. You'll note in the report that notification of this charge, which has been going since 1992, notification of the 5-year extension was sent to over 950 businesses in the area. Council did not receive any objections or submissions, which is a rarity, but sounds like a positive that businesses are willing to keep paying this special rate and charge, noting that, and you can see in the report, there's a number of conditions there as well, including capping the amount and some discounted rates for particular properties as well. But as I said, this particular trade association is rolling out some good activities, events, initiatives that are trying to continue to reinvigorate shopping strips when the ongoing trend is for people to shop online or go to your mega high points, your mega centres like High Point. So, happy to support, second this motion, and let's hope that the just over $1 million that it will raise in the next 5 years continues to get put towards events that deliver more than that back into the local economy.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Only very briefly, Madam Mayor, just to concur with what the other councillors have mentioned and to say, well, this brings all of the traders together. They come and support their strip, their local strip, and try and create a competitive environment against those areas that are, as Councillor my mind's gone blank. Nation mentioned the High Points and the Westfields that are close by that obviously draw the would-be shoppers. But these traders do it hard. They combine together, they back themselves in, and they put their hands in their pocket and say, no, we want to have a better strip here. And I take my hat off to them because they're putting their money where their mouth is, literally, and getting on and doing the business that we want them to do in Moonee Valley. So 100% support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item is the Financial Performance Report, March 2019. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Race?
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack? Thank you. Are there any questions on this report? No. Councillor Sorais, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just briefly speak from the report. Basically, this is just reiterating our support in relation to the accountability, transparency and responsibility of the financial performance of the Council. The financial report for the period 1st of July 2018 to the 31st of March 2019. It's pleasing to see that Council's overall financial position as at the 31st of March 2019 is a forecast annual surplus of $19.8 million compared to the budgeted surplus of $11.3 million, resulting in a favourable variance of $8.5 million. I do believe our quarterly financial report is available on the website, Moonee Valley website. If I could just have that clarified. Yes, it is. So for those people who may be interested in seeing just where the money goes and how we budget and how our financial performance is running, certainly get on board and have a look on site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the motion?
first of all to echo Councillor Sarace's words, but the report talks about a number of issues that are operating within council. I suppose one of it is lovely to see how the surplus is growing, etc., like that. But we have a number of factors that have also worked in our favour, which is obviously some success in terms of our advocacy for particular grants, and also the contribution that is now starting to flow into council through the developer open space contributions. There are issues around how we're going in terms of completing some of the capital works, and while we're beavering away to do as much as possible, it's quite clear that some stuff will carry over, and we'll need to think and work very carefully in that space. But in terms of things that will be completed this year, the netball courts at Aberfeldy, the Cross Keys Reserve Pavilion, Boeing Reserve, Ormond Park Pavilions, replacement of synthetic surfaces and draining at Moonee Valley Athletics Track, the Ratcliffe Community Hall, Pin Oak Crescent seating, Union Road streetscape, some flood mitigation upgrades, but I'm sure people will ask for more of those as often as they possibly can. And also the implementation of some of the LATMs and the work that's going with those. Some work finally down at Fanny Street Reserve, which is pleasing from my perspective, and also there's energy efficiencies that are being worked into council's activities. So there is a great deal that's happening through the whole of the spending. We're trying to stay as best we can on budget. This year is one where we're doing a record amount of capital expenditure, and that has only been achieved because we have pretty good staff who are trying to run the whole thing in a tough environment.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.7 is the 2018-19 Capital Works Program update. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Sypek? Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack? Thank you. Any questions on the report, councillors? No? Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Councillor. Sorry, Madam Mayor. We've had this report for quite a while now, and I think we've all read through it, and we've teased it, and we've bruised it. We've given it a couple of punches. We've taken a few things out, put a few things in. I think it's a very well put document together by the officers. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Cusack.
As I flagged in when I was talking about the council finances, there is a considerable amount of capital works that has been initiated this year. It also has incorporated a rollover from significant amount of work from the previous year, and we've also having to accommodate not only in that increased scope of works and the amount of works, but changes that are actually occurring within the environment and the business environment in which council's capital works are happening. In particular, rising costs associated with a number of projects, and as a consequence, there are requirements for variations to occur within the capital works program and in its expenditure. They're laid out in this report. I think that the logic of it is that we must accept this and support the council in delivering these things, because capital works is something, if it doesn't happen, it's going to be a problem down the track. And so we must gird ourselves for that. The issue that we have is that we've got a lot of work in the pipeline, and so for the future it's about how we manage and massage and plan that stuff so that it actually gets done on time. And I know that officers are looking very carefully at the timing of work so that it does fall more often within the financial year that it's billed for, rather than for looking into the carryovers.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Race?
It's actually more of a point of clarification, Madam Mayor. In the variations that we're seeking in this recommendation, I just want clarification about the Strathnaver Reserve car park improvements, stage 1. That's just the interim beginning of the car park at the lower end of the reserve.
If you're after clarification, I'll direct that to the appropriate officer.
Thank you.
Which would CEO Brian Lancaster will answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's correct. It is stage 1 at the lower level car park.
Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item of business is notices of motion, and we have 2 notices of motion tonight. So the first one is number 2019-13 Queen's Park Outdoor Pool. So I'd like to call on Councillor Marshall to present her notice of motion.
Sorry, Mayor. Just a reminder, I have a conflict of interest, so I'll be leaving the chambers.
Sorry, Councillor Nation. Thank you. Now, call on Councillor Marshall to present your notice of motion, please.
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to move that Council resolves to receive a report at an upcoming ordinary council meeting, considering opportunities to increase the hours and dates of usage of Queen's Park outdoor pools, including options for enclosure and or heating during cooler months in light of 1, Council's overarching policy of planning on a neighbourhood basis, 2, the large increases in population projected for Moonee Ponds over the coming years, 3, the closure of the East Keilor Leisure Centre while it is being rebuilt, and 4, other municipalities and countries being able to provide extended usage for outdoor pools, including Brimbank Council.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that notice of motion? Councillor Byrne. Thank you. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, this is just about receiving a report, and I've noted the officer comments. So I'm not sure whether they're about not supporting the idea or about producing a report, but I'll take it as both. I suppose this has come about through a number of discussions I've had with people over time about the limited hours and dates of usage of Queen's Park and the desire for it to be open more frequently. And I think as I've reflected on it, there are a few factors which make me think that it's something that we do need to look at, and I certainly acknowledge the operational costs associated with running outdoor pools. They are expensive, and I'm not meaning to dismiss that at all. So that's be something that I'll be interested through the report seeing what those costs actually are. But we need to keep in mind, if we are trying to put into place and we're trying to live our overarching council policy through MV 2040, that we've actually got to do things that enable that to occur. And when we think about the 2 places in Moonee Valley, the 2 neighbourhoods that are projected to have the most significant growth, they are Ascot Vale and Moonee Ponds. And neither of those suburbs have an outdoor pool that is open during summertime. Obviously people will be able to go up to East Keilor when that's all said and done. But at this point in time, people sometimes forget that Ascot Vale doesn't have an outdoor pool. So for our most areas that will be experiencing the most growth and the most population, to not have an outdoor pool open all year round, I think is something that we need to consider whether it's appropriate and whether we're servicing, and the people of Essendon too, who would be closer to Queen's Park. So just thinking about how do we service people and meet the needs of our growing population. We know we can't afford to build another outdoor pool somewhere else other than we've got East Keilor. So again, we've got to look at what our Councillor Byrne might have different ideas. We've got different. We've got to make sure that the assets that we have we use as to the maximum ability as possible. And I have reflected too on the closure of East Keilor for that period of time. How we make sure that people do have an option in Moonee Valley for outdoor swimming because they won't have one. So I think that's something that we need to look at, whether it can be provided. And as you do a bit of Googling, a bit of research and talk with people, you can see that other municipalities and countries have a range of ways in which they enable extended usage to occur. And this actually came about through an email, the sort of final thing that made me think I'm going to put that to council, through an email from a man in Moonee Ponds who was talking about how he'd lived in a Nordic country and that they'd managed to provide all-round access to outdoor pools. So, as I said, it's about simply getting a report and outlining the various pros and cons associated with extending the usage, but I think we owe it to our community to really try and look at how we use the assets that we've got to the maximum extent possible.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, I will, and thank you, Councillor Marshall, for bringing this into the chamber. I remember a couple of years ago when I brought into the chamber just increasing the length of time that our pools were open, because for some unusual reason we were closing our outdoor pools right on the start of the Easter holidays. There's obviously been changes at East Keilor, but that was something that was passed in this chamber previously. And I suppose this is a further extension, because what came from that also is that there's some people who do, as Councillor Marshall said, want to swim all year round. They may want to swim in winter. Today in May, it was quite a nice day. And who's to say that you wouldn't necessarily want to swim on a day like today? And I think with the unprecedented success of the triathlon that we held in Moonee Ponds earlier this year, it shows that there is an appetite in the community for different sports that may utilise the pool. And it's something for us to consider lengthening the hours of operation. The capital cost of pools, as we know with the East Keilor Leisure Centre, is significant. So why would we spend a significant amount of money on capital works and then not utilise them to their full capacity? All this is asking, as Councillor Marshall has said, is for a report to come back into the chamber. It may come back in and say that the operational costs are excessive, and that will obviously be another debate to have. But I think that it is definitely well worth having the report come in. I think another thing that should be noted is there has been the closure of the East Keilor Leisure Centre, and there are a lot of people looking for somewhere to swim, and it will be great when that is back up and running, no doubt. It will be interesting to see how Queen's Park copes over the summer period. It will no doubt be busy, and just hopefully the ducks stay away, because I know they can cause a bit of havoc down there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor like to speak to this? Councillor Gatchie-Morici.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to support the motion for a report to come back to us. I am mindful that for us to be able to turn around to the community and say that we've fully explored something that is raised with us regularly, I want to be able to see the dollars and cents, and by cents I mean the common sense as well as the sense, behind whether or not there would be the patronage in winter to justify the operational costs. But certainly we can't make those sorts of decisions without seeing all the information in front of us, so I'm happy to see a report. I won't prejudge without seeing it, but I looked forward to seeing how it could possibly stack up, because other than freezing over as an ice skating rink, I can't see Queen's Park working in winter as much as it needs to make it profitable. So,
thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Cusack.
Yes, I'd just like to pick up on your fourth point, Councillor Marshall, although I agree with the whole motion, but the fourth point is about sort of looking at how this asset can be used in the future in different ways. And I'm hoping, and I really would like to see from the officers a serious discussion about sort of what the pool can look like going into the future. I've seen too often ourselves restricted and constricted by the fact that we've got a wire fence around there and it's a very traditional setup. Now, I do appreciate, and you're quite right, Councillor Byrne, about the things like the triathlon and so on like that. We don't close Port Phillip Bay in the wintertime. There are lots and lots of swimmers who go down there, and we had T-shirt Tommy Hafey for a million years going for a serious swim, and we've got the group called the Icebergs that do it all the time. So why shouldn't we be a little bit inventive about that? Also, I kind of like, and I've always loved the idea of how we could potentially turn the front of that pool towards Queen's Park and sort of get that invitation in from people who are just enjoying the amenity. And maybe it's not just necessarily about swimming in it. There's something to be gained by actually just seeing a place that's got water. And maybe it is something about reticulating water in there and just creating a really small feature where you can just sort of move from one place to another, from off the grass onto the concrete on a day like today, maybe just enjoy life a little bit more, and at the same time take up options that could be those new ones that pop up in Council Marshall's point 4, which people will do. And at some point we need to test the community's ability to think a bit about this. So I'm hoping that through the course of this whole response that we keep in mind things that might be opportunities for working closer with the community about it, rather than just what happens inside a cyclone wire fence in the current world.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Sophie?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to commend Councillor Marshall on her notice of motion, and I think it's very, very valid. But I've got to put my hand on my heart and really speak what I really would like to say. I think we're not going to get a positive response because of the status of the Queen's Park. If it was redeveloped and it was, state of the art and brand new, I think you would find the report would be completely different to the one that we're getting now. So, even though I'm happy to support this report and get a report back, but I think when we redevelop it, I think we should also have a look at it after it gets redeveloped, because I think you'll find there'll be a lot more interest in it when it actually is not an eyesore, but actually a state-of-the-art facility.
Thank you, Councillor Sophic. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? No? I'll put it to the vote. No, I'm not speaking against. He's in support. Everyone's in support. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? There you go. Unanimous. Thank you. The next notice of motion is number 2019-14 Newmarket Bridge. So I'd like to call on Councillor Marshall to present her second notice of motion.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to move that Council resolves to write to the relevant state ministers, the State Member for Essendon, VicTrack and other relevant authorities, 1, outlining the safety, aesthetic and other issues encountered in relation to the Newmarket Bridge, including the repeated truck collisions with the bridge, and 2, requesting advice and action in relation to the mitigation and resolution of these issues.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack. Thank you. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you. Look, this is just when you feel yourself just going through the same discussions and the same conversations, the same emails, and you start thinking, okay, well, I can keep doing this, but it's that whole thing around, well, that's a decision in itself. So for me, this is about just having something on the record and trying to get some momentum to address the issues associated with the Newmarket Bridge. And I noticed actually as I was coming into council, thankfully it wasn't the Newmarket Bridge, but the Napier Street Bridge had a truck collision today, and it's just one of those issues that needs to be resolved more broadly. But I'm obviously focusing on our patch of the world. So for those, I'm sure everyone knows the Newmarket Bridge. It's a very well-known part of Moonee Valley, and we've got a number of issues associated with it, and certainly when there is a truck collision, it just sends the whole network into chaos. So those implications around what it does to the traffic network, what it does to the cycling, the public transport, the pedestrian access in and around the area is just hideous. And there's obviously the safety issues that are associated with that, the truck drivers who collide, but also the people who might be there when the incident occurs. And certainly we wouldn't want to see a very serious incident where someone was killed or otherwise seriously injured. So that's part of it. Again, given so many people move through Racecourse Road heading under the bridge, it's fair to say, perhaps not the most attractive feature that we have in Moonee Valley, and I would like to see a real attempt to try and beautify it and try and make it a real entrance to the area. And I think there are lots of opportunities and there are lots of creative and artistic things that could be done with a bridge that wouldn't distract but would actually enhance the appearance and might actually help serve as part of a warning that, you know what, there's a relatively low bridge coming up ahead. So it's about obviously trying to get some traction with it at the government level, at the VicTrack level, and certainly I didn't mention them in the motion, but the officers are mentioned in the comments. Obviously a discussion with our City of Melbourne neighbours, because I'm sure they'll have views too. But this is hopefully to, rather than have the same discussions that I've been having now for close to 7 years, to get the ball rolling in a sense that we'll have information on the record, and who knows what might come out of it. Might be nothing. I know Councillor Sopek's not a fan of writing letters. That's all right. But I'm keen to just try and get some traction on the issue when at the moment I don't feel that we're getting anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yep. Railway bridges in Flemington have been on the agenda for so long, as Councillor Marshall has pointed out, but going way back when Councillor Marshall was very young and well before her time on council. I only say that on the basis that we have put up with a number of reasons that have ultimately all appeared to be faulty, from government, from tramways, from the VicTrack world and so on. And there have been on many occasions the classic case of a handball where people don't particularly think it's their issue, except that they should be working with everybody as a united voice on this. So when you hear people from the transport industry saying it's not our problem, unfortunately it has to be, because the people they're representing or have got businesses are very much affected by this. So there's all sorts of bits and pieces. There are a number of these bridges in and around, and there's a couple in Racecourse Road that we need to think about, not just the one that's at Newmarket Station. And look, I can't remember exactly where it was, but I was sailing around Hawkesburn area or somewhere like that recently, and they've got a bridge not dissimilar to what you have at Newmarket, and the first thing I noticed was that it had diagonal painted green and yellow lines on it and all the rest of it. Instead, we're asked to put up with rust and a rusty colour and a sign that sort of says low bridge. Clearly that doesn't work. In the darker times and all the rest of it, nothing stands out. And so maybe somebody might actually sit down with these guys and design come up with some colours and some options that are optics that work, because plenty of people obviously just don't get it. And while I was sitting here and waiting and listening to Councillor Marshall, I was also flipping through some records online of just all of the cars and trucks, the trucks that have been caught under those bridges, and it's quite horrific. I think we need to stir this possum up. but it would be also important to talk about how they can be very important parts of making our community work in a very simple way. And it's not just about sort of the flow of traffic, but it's also about how people use and understand the bridges and walk through them and pace their lives around Racecourse Road. Anyway, leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. So the next report is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business? No? Delegate reports. Do any councillors have anything they'd like to report on in their roles as delegates? Councillor Soares.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of little notes from the Metropolitan Transport Forum, which I'm Council's delegate to. Just basically there was some discussion, there was an input from Daniel Boer from Public Transport Advocate, who basically gave a bit of a presentation on the growth of Melbourne, travel demand, and which is well beyond the capacity of the present system, and basically spoke about state governments that have chosen to invest in costly transport infrastructure with high visibility and political value without equivalent attention to services and operational performance. The infrastructure is necessary to enable services, but additional operational investment is required so the infrastructure can realise full potential. The PTUA's vision of an anywhere-to-anywhere turn-up-and-go network is not being achieved, and it is not clear what the government vision is for the public transport network. There was kind of people that agreed or didn't agree with that, but it was more of about a presentation. So he also commented on the public transport mode of rail, such as Metro 2 being a high priority project, connecting growth areas to the city, plus servicing Fisherman's Bend and Parkville, and logical to follow Metro 1. Spoke about the suburban rail loop that has little history of planning and development, but a useful means to provide cross-town connection. Also recommended the Airport Rail, the Rowville Rail and the Doncaster Rail are necessary additions to the network and served to some degree by the outer suburban loop. He spoke a little bit about the trams, about the old tram fleet and accessibility, with the main issues being that he reinforced the point that there is potential to greater maximise the fleet operations and provide more services and extended timetable. As far as buses were concerned, they provide a geographic coverage that rail services don't, but a poor service level. Service layout historically designed for connection rather than efficiency, and for the present and future Melbourne needs a major overhaul to be straightened and simplified for a direct and logical network. Timetables need upgrading for an extended service day and weekend to suit the activity patterns of Melbourne. There was further mention in regards to the advocacy from MTF. So Greg Day from Edunity, or Edunity, whichever way you want to pronounce that, reported that the MTF is following up political contacts from the pre-selection transport forums that were held in 2018, and a series of meetings is being set up with the current MPs with a transport interest or influence. The executive has already met with Paul Hamer, MLA Box Hill, Rodney Barton, MLC Eastern Metropolitan, and most recently with Fiona Patton, MLC Northern Metropolitan. Hopefully we will get some input from the MTF with our state members as well. That was basically about it. And then there was other councils that shared their information. There was quite a few representatives from Maribyrnong who put up some of their issues and what are following through, but I'll report on that at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Soares. Any other councillor wish to report on any role as delegate? I might just mention to you that I attended the Australian Mayoral Aviation Council conference just the other week, and obviously we have Eston Airport within our boundaries and Melbourne Airport on our doorstep, so it was quite a very interesting conference actually. I was very glad that I went. Melbourne Airport had that day that I attended just released their draft master plan, and as we all know, we have received the Eston Airport draft master plan, so it was very timely, and I had the chance to ask questions directly of Melbourne Airport and learn more about their plans for the future, which was very informative. I also heard about noise contours and their limitations, which I look forward to investigating further, particularly as we've now got these 2 draft airport master plans pretty much in front of us. So I think, well, what I did learn also was that regulations in the aviation world are always changing, and there always is, at the moment there's quite a few regulations that are actually sunsetting, so I believe. So I think because we are, you know, we do have Essendon so close to us, and the changes at Melbourne Airport will affect Essendon, there's no doubt about that. I think we probably really need to be more on the front foot from what potentially we have been in the past, and maybe encourage councillors that we should even look at being more involved with this committee. We're not a member of the group, but just flagging that based on the information that I learnt about at the conference and everything else going on in that aviation sphere, I think it is probably very, very beneficial that we stay in regular contact with that Aviation Council, because we just need to be on the front foot. But I understand that the Essendon Airport Draft Master Plan will be brought to us next month, I think, for discussion. I'm not sure about the Melbourne Airport Draft Master Plan, but just wanted to let you know that that was going on in the background, and report on that in my role as delegate. The next item of business is confidential reports, and there are none this evening. So that concludes our business on tonight's agenda. So thank you to members of the public gallery and those watching at home via live stream. We thank you for your interest in our meeting, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time. The meeting is officially closed. Thank you.